DOM or STP, it's kind of like the bath salt of the late 60s, where it was like it hit the streets and it was just insane panic, like media panic of like, this escaped from a military lab, this came from the Edgewood Arsenal, like, so it was at a time, like, you have to kind of go back and realize, like, LSD was made illegal I think in California in like 1966. So STP was what the acid chemists wanted they were looking for a legal alternative so they could keep their thing going. So Owsley and what's his name? Tim Scully were like the head acid chemists back then for like Haight-Ashbury area. And they started making DOM tablets, or STP, we'll just call it DOM, but STP and DOM are the same thing. So they got no one knows how, but some people think Alexander Shulgin gave them the recipe. Some people think Alexander Shulgin gave them a sample. It's still like all like lost in the like just corridors of time. They wanted to introduce a new legal substitute as LSD was becoming banned. I think California was made illegal, then it was made illegal in the rest of the United States like maybe a couple months later in like 1967 or 68. And DOM is supposed to be dosed between like 1 to 4 for like a mild stimulant effect, and then 4+ is where it starts to get kind of psychedelic. So they were making tablets in the 20s supposedly, or 10s. Still no one to this day knows what the exact truth was, but either way it was a super high dose. And then the other problem was it's not that scary of a substance, but it takes like 3 hours to come on. So a lot of these people that were used to acid were taking like one and being like, okay, I'm an hour in, I kind of feel this, I'm going to take another one. And it has like, the DOM has a very long come up. So like you get hit with a wave of like effect, but you don't know exactly where it's heading until you're about 4 hours after you took it. So these kids were taking like maybe 30 milligrams, maybe 40 milligrams. And by the time it fully kicked in, they were signing up for like a horrifying, like all-inclusive trip that they've never experienced before, even on like the higher doses of LSD. So it created like the traditional like just panic of, every newspaper picked it up, every news outlet, everyone was like STP, STP is what's killing the hippies, STP is what like took Sid Barrett out, it became like a sensational thing. And then just as quickly as that happened, it kind of disappeared and just got written off as like, oh, I hope this acid isn't STP. And most people kind of forgot about it. But then there was a subsect of people that realized what it was and what it could do. And one of those people was Alexander Shulgin. So that's how I came across it when I've been like studying Shulgin's magical half dozen, and STP or DOM was the 4th one out of the 6 that I've yet to try. So I tried mescaline, 2CB, 2CE, and now I'm on to DOM. So I took it about a month ago for the first time. But anyway, let me back that up. So Shulgin put it in his magical 6 or half dozen, and that's kind of why I was like, I want to try this, just because I was on this kick of trying to figure out why all of those things were in his magical half dozen. So I read so much about DOM, and kind of what I gathered from what Shulgin said was everything in his magical half dozen he saw as a different vocabulary to study like human psychology, and for one to like really get to the core of their thought patterns, their way they live, like the way they think. So the DOM was on his list, and a lot of people don't know why. So I took it a month ago for the first time, and I went right off the bat with 4 milligrams, which I thought would have been the beginning of like a psychedelic experience. So it was weird, like an hour in, I started just to feel like a little bit like stimulated, like I'd had a cup of coffee or something. Because also, let me back up and say, DOM is a psychedelic amphetamine. So it's an analog of, 2CD. So it's a phenylethylamine something's added to it that made it into an amphetamine. So it's got a very stimulating quality to it. So at 4 milligrams, I thought I was going to get like a light psychedelic experience, but I ended up just kind of staying up all night and like feeling like this weird, like, it was like a pleasant stimulation, but at the same time, like, I didn't want to do anything. So it wasn't I was like crawling out of my skin. It was just like I was wide awake, but I was also like very placid and very happy just to sit down and like listen to music and put logs on my fire. And then before I knew it, it was like 5 a.m. So I just kind of crawled into bed and like maybe got a little sleep. And then, you know, the next day I think I took a nap and just kind of the whole thing was like a very mild experience, which was funny because I was like ready for a big one. But I just chalked it up to, I was like, okay, you know, now I know like that there's something out there that could act as a stimulant, give you like light psychedelic feelings. But I wasn't like rushing to like tell everyone to do it because it wasn't that interesting. It was kind of like more mellow than I thought. And it wasn't like it wasn't something I would want to take at a party or something because it was very weird. I can't really explain it, but it was just a mild, stimulating, like lightly psychedelic experience. I wasn't getting too much out of it. So I just chalked it up as like, you know, an intro dose. It was cool to know. So then I think 3 weeks later, or maybe, it was 3 weeks later, I bumped it up to 7 milligrams. So same thing. It was a Sunday night. Kids were going to bed. I took my 7 milligrams. And this time, I started feeling it come on way more. And I was getting a little nervous. I was like, okay, here we go. I'm going to get like a full-fledged psychedelic experience from this one. But then about the 4-hour mark, it didn't peter out, but it kind of plateaued into like just a more intense version of what I had the first time. But this time it had like a little bit of a visual thing to where like if I sat there and stared out into the field, like I was like out sitting in my backyard, I could just see like a ripple through the grass that kind of went on forever. And it was like it was like a calming visual type, like, I don't even know what to call it. It was just this like infinite kaleidoscope, but only like a one-side kaleidoscope. Like the grass kind of looked like it went on to infinity. And I just had this like super peaceful feeling. But at the same time, I felt like real sober. But then I would catch a thought and I would start thinking of like, I would trace a thought back to like its very core origin. So I would go through like a thought of like how I act, and then suddenly I'd be remembering like childhood things of like, I can't even explain it. It's so hard. Then I would go back to like, I just was getting these like deep, like psychological analysis of like myself and humanity in general about like the connections of like what it was like to be born and how that shapes your identity, and you know how like the first 5 years of your life do this, and then how like I kept thinking like I was like making sculptures out of my kids by like the way I act and teach them. So it was very psychedelic, but like so clear-headed that I would forget that I was tripping. So I would just like throw logs on the fire and try to follow. I wouldn't even try. I would just start thinking, and the thought would like go back into like kind of like what you would come up with on like a mushroom trip, but as if you were taking it slow. And then you'd kind of like I'd kind of sit up for a second and be like, what the fuck am I even thinking about? I'd be like, oh, I'm fucking tripping on this stuff. And then it would like repeat the cycle. I'd be like, oh, I guess it's not doing much. And I would just start thinking. And then like it was almost like a thinking man psychedelic, where it just would go and go and go. And my brain, maybe it was like the stimulant, or the amphetamine quality of it, but I felt like I was just like going through a filing cabinet in my brain, picking something up and like unraveling it, almost like I was like untying knots in my head slowly and methodically. And then I would get this like aha moment. It was like cleaning out like the closet of my brain, but rather than like what I usually do when I clean out my closet, it's like make another shit pile somewhere else and like get what I need out of there. This was like I was organizing it, I was installing shelves, and like everything was going in its place. But it was cool, but at the same time, it also, like, the most interesting thing of the night was it kind of, like, marked the end, for now, of me studying these Shulgin molecules. Because in all that thinking, I kind of came to the conclusion that, like, with the exception of mescaline sits alone in its own place, where I will do much further research on that one. The other ones, I'm kind of like, I want to get more into them, but I need to, like, literally wake up and dedicated day because they're so long in duration. Like 2CE, 2CB is kind of short, but 2CE, 2CI, and the DOM, they just last forever. So I'm like, I'm going to put a dog ear on this one and get back into these when I have time to like, and it might be 2 years from now. I don't know. I'm just like, I need to get into these when I have time to like wake up and do this at like 6 in the morning. Doing them overnight, it's too hard to see like what the full profile on them. So like, I'm like, if I can do these at 6 a.m., then I'll have the rest of the evening to like sit down and like ponder what has happened and then get some sleep. Also, the other thing is like, back when I was like first getting started, I was studying like mushrooms and LSD pretty intensely. And the LSD started to get a little bit redundant. And I was getting like a lot of like repeating archetypes, and I was getting a lot of like kind of like thought loops that would keep coming up. But when I started studying the DOM, it led me to talk to that guy Keeper Trout. And Keeper Trout put me onto some real good information. He said, first of all, LSD was Shulgin's favorite molecule of all. But I don't know why LSD wasn't in his magical half dozen. I think Shulgin's magical half dozen was more for like what he was doing. He always called himself a tool maker. So he was trying to make tools for psychologists and for like, the mental health world. That was his aim. And mescaline, 2CB, 2CE, DOM, 2CT2, and 2CT7 all fit that bill of what he thought would be great for the world of like, personal like analytics and psychology. And then he also told me a powerful skill for when you're doing like higher dose LSD things is to try to start like meditating into it. And as these thought loops are coming, like you want to surrender in an LSD trip, but to still keep the power and the agency to be like, that's a waste of my time. I'm not going to think about whatever random subjects coming up. He said to start kind of laser focusing on like where you want to head on this trip. So after you do it a couple of times, like when you're getting these thoughts, if it's not what it's not to say like don't like block out like personal transformations and like self-assessments, but if you're getting these like cartoony loops of just nonsense, to be like, I'm going to move this and get to the thing behind it. So he said you can kind of train your brain to like sift through the noise of LSD and really get to like the true meaning of it. But it takes a familiarity that I thought I had, but I really don't have with LSD. So for me, like every time I take an LSD, it's like a couple hits of LSD, hit the fucking ground and like let it wash over me, and then I come up for air when I can. But he was like, try to take it. He didn't say all this, but this is kind of what I gathered from him. He said like, try to take it and get into a meditative headspace where you're going to start exploring this realm. And then the other fascinating thing he told me, that LSD in like the 250 to 300 microgram range is really all you need. But then when you get up to like 1,200 micrograms, it gets very interesting again. So my new plan is to get some high quality, like tested, well-dosed LSD, like very precise dosed LSD, and then work my way from 100 micrograms up to 1,200 micrograms over the course of the next year. So like one trip a month, or if it takes me longer than a year, one trip every like 4 to 6 weeks, and then just like note down like what happens to me personally as I climb that ladder, and then also like what are those different doses like. So that might be my new project. It's still to be determined with like, I don't know, because my ideas change very quickly. So what I think I might do is do this high-dose LSD experiment and then use what I've learned from the Shulgin ones to integrate all of the stuff that comes out of all the high-dose LSD stuff. So like after working my way through, this is like I said, the fourth of the magical half dozen. I think the DOM is, and I want to try it at the higher doses, but like the only thing that scares me about the higher doses is like I kind of got a glimpse of where it heads at 7 milligrams, and I was like, this could be like not scary, but it's the fact that LSD takes you out of your head and mushrooms take you out of your head. It's super scary at first, but like once you get used to the psychedelics, it's kind of a relief. Whereas like I feel like a high dose of DOM would be like opening up your own brain and then diving deep into your own brain. And there's joy in there, there's sorrow in there. I think it's a deep psychedelic experience that's strictly, this is just what I think from what I've gleaned. I think it's a full-on head trip, but deep inside your own brain with no metaphor, no like, no like the LSD or mushroom distractions. I think it's like an integrative tool for like psychonauts where like for me, like LSD gives me all this crazy stuff and all these visuals, but then I'm also getting these profound messages. Whereas the DOM, it actually, at some points in the night, I was like sorting out the archetypes that come to me in LSD trips and being like, oh, that's what that means. Like, that's what that's coming from. But I think this is just a way to like, I think it's a way to like take the deeper psychedelic experiences you'll get from like heavy tryptamines and LSD and whatnot and kind of bring them into like, how am I going to apply this to my life in like a clear-headed way where it's not like sometimes I come off a heavy acid trip and I'm like, I don't know how I'm going to explain to my wife that we're moving to Colorado. Whereas this is more like you're thinking like, I got to start, like I was going over like the way I just keep shit everywhere and the way I like never clean up outside my house. And it was kind of like, not like manically, but just being like, I need to start like finishing all these projects and make everything nice so that, because part of the trip I was like up all night and like my house was a little messy and I was like, I need to start like treating all of this like a shrine so that like I'm constant, because there's a state of the DOM where it's like you feel so good and euphoric and calm, but like you're able to like look around and you're like, I should kind of manifest this around me all the time. So it was very cool, but I'll say like it has a dark side to it too. Not like a scary dark side, but like it opens up your brain where like everything's on the table. So like it's not like, oh, I feel great, this is great, and you're not like getting high by any means. It's definitely like a crystal clear look at your situation with like super fast organizational thinking. So but it's also like got like an edge to it where like it's definitely not a recreational thing in my opinion. Like if someone was like, I want to take that and like go to a barbecue, I'd be like, nah, you're gonna like, it's got like some like body tension, it's got some jaw tension, so there's definitely like a downside to it. But I'm gonna try it, like I said, I'm gonna try it at 10 milligrams maybe this late in the summer. I don't know. It all depends how my like acid test goes. So I'm happy I studied DOM. I'm glad that like I think it needs to be like re-examined by people because it's one of those things that people, and I'm not saying like bath salts need to be re-examined, but it's one of those things that it just got pulled out of like so many people I've talked to in the last couple of weeks, I told them I'm studying DOM. They're just like, fuck that, dude. I don't want to trip for 3 days. But it's like no one knows if that's what happened. Like this was like the original cases of it. Like no one knows if there was other drugs used. So it's just like a fascinating psychedelic that kind of got swept under the rug that I think definitely needs further exploration, even on my part. But I think I get the gist of like what Shulgin was trying to say for now.